Here in the now, I am hearing the now as I listen, and I listen, the sound that goes on, in the ground, in the here and now, and you hear the song of the earth, she was singing in the sky, in the circle around, with the sound that carries the ancient memory constantly, gracefully, calling us to heal. Now stewards are we from the inner world to the world we see, raising up our voice for unity. Here in the now, I am hearing the now as I listen, and 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 I listen.
Hey everyone, it's Ura Soul, and this is a video where I'm going to talk about something which applies both to personal health and also to political health and society in general. We're going to kind of cross the boundary between the micro and the macro, between the internal and the external, with something which influences pretty much everything that we ever encounter as human beings. What I'm actually talking about is something I've covered a few times before, but I'm going to approach it from a different angle, and I'm pretty sure still most people have never heard me talk about this. So it's the idea of the separation, the gap between thinking and feeling. And this is a huge subject. It's so important, but I mean, other than certain sources and groups that I participate in, which are a tiny, tiny drop in the ocean of the percentage of people there are on the planet, I never ever hear this topic talked about at all. And basically, we live in a culture which is very heavily focused into visual thinking and mentality and thought processing and logic. And this is part of why advertising focuses so heavily on images, for example, and why music has turned the mainstream sort of commercial angle of music maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, became very focused into visuals, the visual side of things, which is strange in a way because we're dealing with music. It should be about the music, right? I mean, yeah, it's nice to look at beautiful people, but at the end of the day, music is music, it's sound. And, you know, if somebody doesn't happen to be your idea of beautiful, but they make amazing music, then there's no reason for you to not listen to them. But at some point, people decided, oh, well, we can have basically fake kind of models performing on stage, pretending to sing or play instruments, and then we'll get even more interest from the world than we would have done if we showed the actual musicians and singers who may be amazingly talented but don't have the same visual appeal. Obviously, there are some people who have that visual, physical appeal and the ability to sing as well, and you know they're naturally benefiting from that, from in terms of commercially anyway, from the sales, because people like looking at beautiful people and they like hearing beautiful music. However, the point I'm really getting at here is that the mental process within most human beings that processes visual information is not only taking up more of the brain than most other functions, but it's being over relied on. But worse than that, it's being exploited. The fact that many people are so heavily relying on their mentality and their visual processing allows people who want to mislead them to do that. And I'm going to explain a bit about how that works and what we can do to stop that and why it's important that we do stop that. So if we think about marketing, for example, we think about advertising and public relations groups, and we have the phrase public image. So it's not public perception, it's specifically public image, because the image of something is something that can be manipulated much more than the perception of something, in the sense that the perceptions of something include feeling, audio, all kinds of other senses, but public image is very specifically an image. It's a mental image, it's a visual image, and what they're trying to do by manipulating the public image, or the image you have of a person, let's say, or a business or something like that, is key into your kind of imagination process and your visual cortex, ultimately your visual modeling of something. And they're trying to focus on that to such an extent that they can both control what goes into your visual cortex, so, you know, in other words, what you see, but they're also trying to control what you actually perceive through imaging internally. And to do that, first of all, requires that you are put off from using your feelings quite so much, because your feelings will often disagree with the image that you're seeing. So you could see somebody talking or hear someone talking, perhaps a politician or a salesman or something like that, and visually they seem to be perfect. They seem to be great. There seems to be nothing untoward about them. Their eyes aren't moving in a particular way that you've learned to mean they're lying, or their body language is on point. You don't feel, just from looking at them, or you don't imagine from looking at them, that they're lying to you. But your feelings still might feel something's not right. And as a child, I could see this with many, and feel this with many people on television, people like Jimmy Savile, who later turned out to be basically a rapist, and who knows what he was up to. I mean, it was apparently the case that he was having sex with dead bodies, and yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. But I knew from a very small age, like 4 or 5 years old, seeing him on TV, that something wasn't right with that whole vibe he was putting out, and I didn't enjoy watching his show. I just knew it. A lot of people said they didn't pick up on that. I've just always been able to, like many people can, just been able to tune into the feelings of what's a person is evoking, their intentions and their underlying energy field. Not everybody has that. They've for whatever reason in their evolution, they've disconnected from it. They just don't use it. They deny it. They don't listen to it. But I always did enough to be able to pick these things up. So if somebody's trying to deliberately mislead you, and they come from a very heavily funded background, perhaps part of a secret society, let's say, who has had the ability to research how to manipulate people for a very long time behind closed doors, they understand this basic principle that the processes of the individual, the mind and the thoughts and the feelings, need to be separated in order to control someone. If someone's real emotions come through and their imagination and the rest of them is able to feel them and understand them and listen to them, they're much harder to control and mislead than if they're just basically daydreaming and stuck in a mental-only process. So when you hear people like Donald Trump and other politicians spouting about how they've achieved this, how they've achieved that, painting a mental picture, describing themselves, basically telling a story, without ever really backing it up with any kind of facts that can be proven, any evidence really at all most of the time, what they're really doing is relying on you having already been disconnected from your feelings, basically, because your feelings will say, well, hang on a minute, maybe we should question that. Where's the evidence for that? How does that tie into what I already know? If you're just in a mental-only dream state, kind of disconnected state, then yeah, you might question it a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you've got no emotional feedback motivating you to question it, you're not likely to do it, basically. You're more likely to just be able to take the information in, consider it a little bit, value it, weigh it up, and say, well, yeah, I like that, or whatever. But obviously they're giving you images that you as a potential follower of them want to see. So basically they only have to give you what you want to see, and that'll be fine, and they won't meet much resistance from you. However, if your feelings are involved, then your feelings are going to be much more discerning and causing you to question more and stimulating the kind of thoughts you need to basically ensure your own survival. That's what this really comes down to, is that without real feelings being allowed to come into your mind and change and guide the way you think, you won't really know how to survive. You can be sure that animals and, let's say, tribespeople living in the jungle aren't just relying on their eyesight. They're relying very heavily on their feelings and intuition. And often they and I and other people who use this ability can feel what's going to happen before it happens, because we can feel the energy fields involved, the intentions, and ultimately the emotional system of living beings comes from our will. It comes from the part of us that desires, that wants certain outcomes. And generally speaking, the will wants to live. So even though there might be two beings who are opponents, even an animal and a human, if they both want to really live, the will doesn't necessarily want either of them to die. The will is like a unified field, basically. It's not completely unified, but it has strong connection, and it's much more, let's say, generally compassionate by default than people's minds often are. So in other words, the source of your intuition and your feelings and your desires, generally speaking, wants to look after you and other beings as well. It's a loving part of us. So basically, if a creature thinks mentally, an unloving thought, I want to attack this other creature, it's quite possible for that person or being who's under threat to tune into that in advance through their emotions and take action to defend themselves or make sure they don't get attacked. And this, I actually experienced this when I was a teenager, when literally a bodybuilder sized guy, massive steroid type guy, attacked me, and I felt that it was going to happen in advance and was able to be prepared for it and ducked under the punch. I'd never seen this person before, and it took me years to understand why that happened, which is another story in itself. But the point is, I knew from that age that this kind of thing was possible. I knew it because I'd experienced it. There's no doubt in my mind. I just didn't fully understand what was going on. Now I do. And it is fairly complicated to understand, but the basics are that you have this intuitive ability which can detect movements in energy and before the rest of you will detect them, certainly before your visual senses are going to detect them. So ultimately, your emotions allow an intuition which is very deep and very far reaching and has the capacity to tell right from wrong, truth from fiction, and so on. Part of the reason why people reject that idea is because when they try to use that ability, they get either mixed information or nothing, and they just say, well, it's not real. These other people are making it up. I can't do it, and I'm not doing it, so no one can do it. They're not taking into account that their own issues internally are preventing them getting right information from their intuition. Maybe the judgments and belief systems they have are blocking the information, they're filtering it out unconsciously, they don't even know they're doing it. There's a few things that can cause you to get incorrect information or no information from your intuition. But that doesn't mean to say intuition doesn't exist and these things aren't real and that you can't heal and actually benefit from these as well, because as far as I know, everyone can. So this whole journey of integrating the thoughts and feelings together is something that actually manifests on all levels of self, but specifically happens within the heart of the individual. So your heart has thoughts and feelings moving through it. So if you can feel, if you have enough of a feeling body already, you should be aware, you will be aware that at times you feel strongly something in your heart. And you can also have a sense of consciousness in your heart as well. If you tune into that now, you should or are likely to be able to have some sort of sense of awareness in your heart that's not your brain, but you're still thinking there. It's just a different kind of thinking. My understanding is that the brain tends to be a bit more polarized and a bit more divided, let's say, than the heart is. The heart tends to be more unified and focused and balanced ultimately, and the heart is a balancing center. So ultimately what I'm talking about is the difference between being hearted and being heartless. So when you're heartless, your thoughts and your emotions don't bond properly, basically, or at all, and so then you end up having thoughts that lack love, lack the intuition abilities, lack feeling, heartless thoughts. Plus you can also have emotions which lack the guidance from thinking as well. So you might have unbalanced emotions. You don't even know why you have certain emotions, you just suddenly have an emotional outburst. It doesn't mean to say that you're evil. It means that you're experiencing a state of heartlessness, which is the result of an injury, and it can be corrected ultimately through consciously choosing to unite your thoughts and your feelings, making sure that your thoughts don't overpower your feelings and your feelings don't overpower your thoughts. That's, an element of balance. So a big part of how you do that is being very consciously aware of what you're thinking and making sure that you don't think thoughts that say that you should block out certain feelings and that kind of thing. Now, when you start to get really deeply into this, you'll realize that society is largely structured, at least in what we call the West, largely structured to actually prevent us expressing our real feelings. For example, manners, the kind of manners that you might have at a dinner table or whatever we've been taught to use, generally speaking, they're there to prevent you having real emotions coming out. Because there's a sort of agreed thing that's quite old, that basically, or a rule that's been passed on and programmed into people that says, we want to have a good time, we don't want to cause arguments, so let's not do certain things that we know are going to make certain people angry or afraid or whatever it is. And that's where a lot of manners come from. It's just basically stopping people being triggered into their feelings. And you might say, well, that makes sense. Why, I don't want somebody to be angry and arguing with me when I'm having dinner, but that's fair enough. But the point is that you won't really get a real balanced, pleasant experience until that person's anger has been cleared out properly, and so that you don't need to, skip around them, carefully choosing your words or moving your hand in the right place. You can just be you in a relaxed way, and they won't be angry because they've already processed their anger. That's actual balance. So it's a very complicated subject, but the point being that we have this gap between thoughts and feelings that's being exploited by marketers, mind controllers, social engineers, politicians, you name it. They're all tapping in various degrees of consciousness and awareness to this reality that if they can bypass real feelings or get you to avoid your real feelings and really heavily focus into the visual aspect of your thought processes, then they can mislead you that much more easily and effectively. So maybe next time you listen to a politician giving a speech or watch TV adverts and that kind of thing, maybe just consider this for a moment and pause and just focus on your feelings and your heart and notice how much you're probably, when you're sort of zoning into the TV screen, tuning into it, you're probably disconnected from the reality around you and you're not in your body so much, you're not paying attention to your body, your mind is distracted by the TV. Whereas if you were in a room with someone, you would probably be a lot more attuned to your feelings, perhaps because you know intuitively that when you're in a room with someone, there's a chance they can physically do something, like they could attack you or something like that. So on that level, you're much more ready to be aware in your body. But when you're watching a TV and a computer, it's different. You don't have that threat, so you're more likely to be more mentally focused. So one thing you can do is just be conscious of that and say, hey, maybe I need to be more whole. I need to be more allowing. I need to be more allowing of my body and emotions to have a presence in my thought process as I participate in using the internet and watching TV, for example. And the more you do that, the more you'll find that you can really, it's almost like, well, it really is like your IQ increases, your emotional intelligence increases as well, and you're actually able to detect much more information and see through a lot of the misleading traps that are being laid for you to get you to think certain things which aren't true and that ultimately you wouldn't think unless you were kind of a bit lost, basically. So I could go and play some clips recently from Donald Trump, which partially what's motivated me to make this video, because some of the things he's been saying are, like usual, I mean, to anybody who actually does their research or even just questions, you'll realise that the things he's saying don't stand up to an examination at all. An example being, he talked about cryptocurrencies, and he was basically echoing what various bankers have been saying for the last couple of years, spuriously, basically just saying, cryptocurrencies are they're used by criminals. They support the drug trade and that kind of thing, and they're unstable, and basically they're a bad thing. And then he went on to say, we have in the US a currency. It's called the US dollar. It's stable and blah blah blah. It's like the all-American awesome dream thing. Obviously, skipping over the ridiculous reality that US dollars are used in crime every day all around the world. It's not like Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies are somehow magically more criminal than US dollars. Probably the amount of crime that involves US dollars is hugely more than that involves cryptocurrency, just from the fact that there's hugely more dollars in circulation and in use than there is cryptocurrency. So the idea of claiming that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are some sort of criminal thing is completely absurd. And you would only ever believe it if you didn't check what he was saying and you just trusted him. And you basically just said, oh, he's he's such a smart guy. He's so amazing. He's got the best everything, which is what he always says. He's sort of hypnotizing people, basically. Oh, yes, the best, the best, the best. The key thing here is if you want to have the best in your life and you want to believe that you're part of the winning team, let's say, and someone who is allegedly the most powerful person in the world, which he isn't, but anyway, keeps saying over and over in a almost hypnotic way, over and over and over again, believe me, I've got the best things, we've got the best everything, blah, blah, blah. Then if you want to hear that, then a certain percentage of people are going to get sucked into that. And it's a huge problem, right? I mean, literally, the more people do that as leaders, the more they're able to cause a huge amount of suffering when the time comes for them to flip out and start a war on someone, or pass some sort of law that really is against the interests of humanity. If they've got enough people hypnotized, then guess what? The people are going to support them. And you've only got to look at Adolf Hitler and people like that. My dad actually knows a woman. I think she's passed on now. He had a customer in his business in Britain who was from Germany and actually had met Hitler. when she was younger and looked into his eyes and so on. And she very specifically told my dad he had very, very hypnotic eyes, very unusual, never seen it in anyone else. So, that's important to understand. As a child, I always used to watch documentaries about World War II, and my grandfather was in World War II in the RAF. I had another family member who liberated one of the concentration camps, for example, as a medic. So, I was hearing these stories from them, and it was a huge thing for them. It was the biggest thing in their life, massively. So for me, growing up, it was a big thing too. And I really wanted to understand how this could even happen. I could see that my family members had probably been too traumatized to really think deeply about what the hell was going on. But now I could see we had television and we had this ability to look back and analyze really what happened. And I was always very deeply questioning this. Is partly why I know so much about it now. But part of it was an actual ability to hypnotize. And as I understand it, they were using technology behind the scenes to using frequencies and things to actually do that to the crowds as well. Can't prove that, but I'm fairly sure they were. But even if they weren't, Hitler's skill, let's say, or his ability was very much in knowing how to modulate people's consciousness in and out of different frequency bands, trigger certain emotions, implant thoughts at the right time, and that kind of thing. So you could basically conjure this energy of denial, hatred, anger, and trigger it and direct it in the way that he wanted it to be directed, and people would be behind it and think it was a great thing. And that's what we really need to be aware of and very, very, very careful of when listening to politicians in particular. And they know that people have become more sophisticated since Hitler's time, and they know that people are watching out for this kind of thing, so they just change the way they do it. The techniques change, but the intention and basic structure of what they're doing remains the same, which is deceive in many different ways, paint pictures, get people to believe in the pictures, take their potential opponents and describe them as being evil. Like, for example, Trump describes basically anybody who disagrees with him as being this like criminal being. And just try and do everything you can to distract away from what you're doing and point the finger at someone else. And that's basically what they do. And then eventually it will escalate into a war, which is, is always on the cards. And let's say we're close to that now with certain countries. So I would really, really like if everybody were to just take this to heart and say, all right, well, I don't really know if what he's saying here is true, but it sounds important. Maybe, it can't hurt for me to just spend some time focusing into myself and going into my feelings and my heart and paying more attention to that. And maybe allowing my internal reality to be more important for a while than the outer reality. See what happens. See whether you suddenly start to be able to detect things you were missing before and get different perspectives and different ideas about people. Because I'm pretty sure you will. And, there's no greater service you can give to humanity than bringing back intuition to our consciousness and being able to guide us collectively more from the heart than we have been. Because that's the way we're going to survive. That's the way our children and grandchildren and other descendants are going to be able to enjoy life without being terrified of what's happening around them and lacking power and being exploited. So live from the heart. That's the message. And that's also the message of Eureka.org and the Earth Heart community, which are the social network that I run. And as you can see, the logo spinning here, it runs on the Steam blockchain. And basically you can get paid to post and comment on there. And the whole function and purpose of it is to co-create realities which help us heal, balance, and evolve to change the world in the kinds of ways I've been talking about. So what could be better, basically, than coming together with like-minded and like-hearted people to improve the world and get paid in the process? I mean, that's pretty amazing. So if you haven't already, do come and check it out at eureka.org, ureka.org. And definitely do leave comments about this beneath, and I'm more than happy to reply and answer to anyone. And don't forget to upvote and reblog and retweet, whatever else you need to do to spread this about. It'd be really helpful. So until next time, peace.